Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going old school. A special guest, the man who brings doom with his sword, the man who knows his way around classic tabletop role playing games. We have Doomsword.
Hello.
Thanks for coming. So, anyone
Thanks for
who
having me.
who doesn't know, Doomsword is one of the other players in the Gamma World game I play in on Friday nights. He also plays on a regular Tuesday night advanced D&D game over on the Dungeon Delvers channel, which is always very fun. So go check that out tomorrow night. So Doomsword, you have been making waves recently with your, shall we say, adaptations or new interpretations of classic D&D. So my first question has to be, why? So you've got AD&D 1E, which is just about 50 years old itself. We're up to, God help us, 5.5 or whatever they're calling the new one. What is it about this version of AD&D 1E that's the sweet spot for you?
Well, so one of the things is most certainly that's what I started with. Okay, so there's a sort of nostalgia or a nostalgic purpose to that sort of thing, but and I've played it for a tremendous amount of time, but I've also played through all the editions. As everybody will do when their group of friends migrates to something different. Then they end up playing something different. So I grew up with 1E, moved to 2E in my middle teens, recaptured some of my friend group. We played that for a while, and then I moved back to 1E in my sort of late teens, and then I moved back to 2E in my early 20s, and then it sort of bounced back and forth between them with various amounts of separation between them, because you don't game all the time, right?
Yeah.
When you grow up on this stuff, you have multiple occurrences where you think, hey, come on, I'm an adult. Why am I doing this? This is kid stuff. And I can't count the number of times that I've given my stuff away to other kids when I was younger because I thought I was too cool for school or whatever. But and then eventually I got back together with old friends in an original gaming group, and we got into 3.5. Played that for a few years under a very good friend of mine who I've known that guy since I was 12, and we played that for a while, and then we ended up moving on to 4E when 4E came out, and shortly thereafter I moved out of the town that I had lived in, well, the city that I had lived in for most of my life, to seek greener pastures, get married, have some children, when I was probably much too old to do so, but it is what it is. And then I would say probably there was a hiatus of about 3 or 4 years, and it was probably about just about 10 years ago that I really was able to get back into enjoying RPGs and finding the time for them. And then a lot of that time was spent, on personal reflection, because I was in a place where there were no role players. Where I live right now, it would be like the 80s as a little kid. People would pick on me for if I went outside and was like, hey, check this out, I got a new rule book for D&D. I might get my ass kicked. I don't know. But it's always been in my head, and specifically the AD&D, because that's where it all started for me. And I really felt like AD&D, and I guess I'm getting off track a little bit, but I'll get back to that. I really felt like AD&D was never given its what it deserved, in my opinion. We had 2E come out. It really wasn't until about 3.0, 3.5 where we started to see some of the tactical options that could be presented by the game, though they were presented in a different way. Now, something about the 3.x series of rule sets is that we were dealing with people who were about my age at the time, who truly loved AD&D, and I feel that, with Eric Mona and stuff like that, and you could just feel that love. And then it ended up becoming Pathfinder. A bunch of us moved on to 4E, and then I eventually, lots of different things happened, and I eventually got back to it after sort of switching careers again, which I've done, several times over the years, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And then it was really about 2018, 2019, where I found myself in the position, though I don't have anybody locally, I found myself in the position where I could run online games, because we started to have these match sites, and we started to have, and I forget what that one was called. And then we started to have Roll20, and that sort of thing. So I sort of got back in to the role playing, and really, or into the RPG rather, and really analyzing the things. But it wasn't until the VTT became sort of a necessity and sort of advanced enough to be able to handle that non-face-to-face interaction that I really got interested. And then at that point, it became clear that there was, if I wanted to continue that specific type of gaming in that specific era of gaming and the things that I used to do when I was younger, then it needed to find a way to evolve to the VTT. Because way back in the day, I mean, all the way, I was using miniatures back when I was 9, 10 years old, measuring them with the tape measure and all that kind of stuff, because I loved it. Right. And then when the Chess X battle mats came out and all that sort of thing, I was all over those. And we used those in our games all the way through, even through 4E. We used them for 30 years. But then I realized the VTT opened things up for players. And when there was a proliferation of people who expected more modern, simplified systems, I realized that I wasn't capable of taking the paradigm of AD&D, particularly first edition. It could be just as well second edition, and bringing it to those people in a grid-based play surface like I had always done, because they hadn't played in my games before, and it was something entirely new to them. And then you run into things like, hey, you get a clear visual representation with a VTT of what's happening on the table, and everybody sees that. So it's just like with the VTT, it's just like sitting with these people, and you're trying to introduce to them a game system that never really defined outside of, hey, 3 men can fight abreast in a hallway. Miniatures are great. Make sure you use Advanced Dungeons and Dragons licensed miniatures only. Minifigs makes a great line. There was nothing else said about it. Nothing said about it in 2E, and it wasn't until 3.x that really happened. So I set out at that point about maybe 6 years ago into trying to rectify that in phases and bring it into my games in a way that other players would understand, in a way that made sense. It was interesting, because really digging into that grid and really looking at it and doing some modding and programming for some of these VTTs, it actually drew me in to really trying to want to understand mechanics and to simplify them while retaining the core concepts that I had always loved. Right. So
Uh-huh.
that's the long way of describing that.
So the people who started playing in your games, were they also people who had played 1E or 2E back in the day, or were these people who either had never played before or they were used to more modern, like a 4E, 5E type of system?
Yeah, well, there was a bit of both. Yeah, there was a bit of both, and it was hard to find on Roll20 and stuff like that,
Yeah.
but it was easy to find on Fantasy Grounds. And I
Oh,
had
okay.
been toying with Fantasy Grounds since 2006, 2007, somewhere around there, and had an account, and I didn't really do any modding or anything like that. My big thing was, ooh, I could use this to set up a projector on the ceiling and project down my battle map and clear out areas and stuff like
Mhm.
that. I didn't use it to the extent that I ended up using it when I got into the idea that, hey, there's a whole community of people who would like to try this stuff, and some of them have played before and some of them haven't. So I spent a lot of time in Fantasy Grounds doing
Mhm.
that stuff, and that really, you don't want to end up with a movement question or a combat related question or any sort of question that's a complex thing to deal with without having an answer, especially if there's 7, 8, 9, whatever people staring at you and expecting you to have an answer. And then
Yeah.
that went into modding it and really trying to figure out the best way or the best approach to take to make the game as uh, tactically feasible as possible.
Hmm. Uh, that's interesting. I've only played 1E a little bit, and I
Sure.
enjoyed it. But it does seem to me to be a very different experience on a tactical level. Uh, like when you compare it to something more like a 5E or maybe Pathfinder, where it's like, okay, we're gonna split actions into different phases. 5E would have action, bonus action, reaction, and then split action and movement into separate things. How is it trying to get people who are used to, I guess I kind of hate to use the phrase more modern systems, but more recent editions of systems. Is it easy to get them into sort of the 1E headspace, or does it take a bit of work?
Yeah. So, okay. So, number one, there's nothing wrong with using
Hmm.
more modern systems or that terminology, because they are more modern systems. And the moment where sort of the Rubicon of this stuff was crossed was with 3.5
Yep.
specifically. They finally, in 2E, I don't really understand what was going on there. I mean, we all have our particular opinions about that, but they actually never clarified anything tactically, and in fact, introduced more questions than they answered, from my personal perspective. And what I had really hoped for that game system was that it would do that. But finally, we get through 3.0, we get to 3.5, and we finally have a clear um, sort of a clear representation of what I had always tried to achieve in 1E games since childhood. Um, so it if you don't have an answer for people, and 3.5 can sort of inform your decisions on how to go back and run 1E. If you don't have a clear answer for people, there's either one of two reasons they're at the game. They're at the game due to it's a novelty, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, okay, hey, I'm playing with this guy, and this is 1E, and this is the way that it is. And movement and stuff like that can be nebulous. Now, I should say that it can always be nebulous if you're playing theater of the mind. That is
Yeah.
where you're just interacting with the other players, and everything's an imaginative exploration. But I don't really feel that AD&D 1E is best at theater of the mind. I think OD&D suits theater of the mind very well, but a lot of the advanced mechanics in AD&D actually require the grid and miniatures, and I wish that had been brought to the forefront. But bringing in more modern players into a system like 1E, generally, if you care about it and you want to keep their attention, requires focusing on being able to tell them sort of exactly what they can do and when and how. You want to kind of leave it open so that, hey, it's the same thing. You can try anything just like every other system, but I actually have a little bit of codification informed by the DMG and the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual on how that's going to work. Because AD&D was in my estimation, was a big departure from OD&D in the sense that it was designed to make the rules consistent and provide for things like tournament play and really, I mean, it was a lofty goal. I don't know that it fully achieved it, and certainly didn't fully achieve it for a modern audience. Modern audiences expect something more. Now, I'll admit that I've read 5e, but I've never actually played in a 5e game because but I feel like if you patch up AD&D to what it can be, then you can welcome a player of any edition, even 4e, which was much more tactical and video game like, into AD&D, because those core principles are of extreme amount of merit. You just have to you just have to consider them because they're all right there. You have to categorize them in a way that makes sense and makes sense to everyone else, and you have to stay consistent. And that's really been the only challenge, and that's what everything that I'm trying to do is all about. Yeah.
So Joe says, I feel like if you're running through 1E type dungeons, Theater of the Mind is just fine, but larger areas start requiring a map, especially with a large party and their hirelings. Yeah, well, it's good that you have people willing to have hirelings. When I play with 5e players, even though I kind of very heavily hint, hey, this would be easier with hirelings, they still don't understand the concept, or they're all very cheap. I'm not sure which the case is.
Right. Yeah. So hang on, I just had to switch over to the little. Can you rephrase that for me? Because I kind of missed it. I just got back into the YouTube chat here. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, right. I think he's on your channel, so right? It won't show up on my channel. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's more of a comment. He thinks 1E Theater of the Mind is just. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. Larger areas do start requiring a map, especially with a large party and their hirelings. And we have to remember that mapping is one of the core features of 1E, right? So Theater of the Mind, even when I would play Theater of the Mind, and I don't generally run games Theater of the Mind that much, except if we're outside of an encounter area, right? Now, sometimes with the VTT, I'll map everything out, lock the tokens, allow the people to explore with their token light sources and stuff like that, and really develop an immersive experience throughout the dungeon. Although a lot of times I'll control the main character and have all the other characters follow through whatever facility I need to do that. But when I have run Theater of the Mind, especially back in the old days, the standard practice was we'd have the battle map laid out on the table. Everything would be Theater of the Mind until an encounter happened. And then an encounter happened, everybody moves their character sheets and dice out of the way. The DM draws out, the encounter area, places miniatures that the PCs can see. The PCs, are all arranged inside the door or whatever. And then we zoom in to, a round and segment based sort of tactical experience. Something like I'm sure you've played like XCOM or something like that.
Oh yeah.
I really feel like that's a pretty good analogy for the way that 1E AD&D was played back in the old days. Everybody's going around, and then everything zooms in to a specific encounter area, and you deal with the battle, walk away with the spoils, or walk away dead, or don't walk away, or whatever. and that's what it is. And the VTT kind of changed that because it gave you a much bigger area than a battle map, but the concept is still the same.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned mapping as one of the core skills of 1E, because that's something that's totally lost. If I had to depend on players to make a map of where they were, not gonna happen.
Right, and that's very unfortunate. And nowadays in the VTT inspired realm, I'm sure that just doesn't even exist. But that was critical back in the day, because we didn't have a VTT. We didn't have, the DM would have a map or whatever, and but the players wouldn't. And that's some of the developing a synergy with the mapper of the group, even if that mapper of the group ends up changing over time, developing that synergy with the player to where you can say, okay, well, you move up, you're keeping along the right wall. The right wall extends for 20 feet and then makes a sharp turn to the left. Okay. It's a 10-foot wide passageway that's extended the same distance, and the passageway also turns to the right, and there's two 10-foot wide passages going off. And once you developed a synergy with the mapper, you could look at the game after it was over, or after the adventure module or whatever was over, and you could see real similarities. But there were other ways to do it too, linear map drawing, where the guy just draws lines. But we always strived for the mapper to end up with a map as close as possible to what the DM had in his possession. There's other ways to do it too, which a friend of mine who's a great DM introduced, which was, okay, you guys explore this. I'll go ahead and draw the graph paper out for you, and then I'll lay it in front of you, and you can see, which kind of eliminates the mapper. But it's also, it can also be necessary in a game that's more modernized and has more options for combat. But mapping is fantastic, and I wish people would use callers as well.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just it's for me. I really see the utility in it, and I really wish my players would do it. But like you said, on the VTT, like, you're kind of revealing things as you go along anyway, so it sort of doesn't work. But I mean, in person, I don't know. You can only hint so many times that it would be a good idea.
Right.
But so for anyone who has not checked it out, if you're watching this on YouTube, on my channel, go check out the links. And we have Doomswords. Let me go over here. No, that did. Oh, because I didn't share it. There we go. So
thank you.
So doomswords.itch.io. And so far you've got two products over here. The 1E core creature framework and the raw combat simulator. Which, by the way, for anyone who's interested, pinned in the chat, we have the core creature available on desktop RPG. But
right.
So I had lots of questions about this. So first of all, for anyone who's interested, it's like a 32-page supplement, um, talking a lot about creature encounters. So, of the things that you've created so far, why did you start here? What is it about
Okay.
creature encounters you thought you needed to get across?
All right. So may I have, and I apologize, may I have one
Mhm.
moment? I need to pull my son's TV dinner out of the oven. I'll be right back.
No problem. Um, so everyone, while we're here, hey, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, why not? Do it. We have lots of guests. We have people talking about gaming. We have comic book creation, storytellers, whether that be authors or people who are visual artists. Uh, Usually at least once a week, trying to get up to twice a week, but we'll see how that goes. And keep an eye out. I am re releasing Empire of the Undying Sun. That's my campaign guide for 5th edition, but I will also have a first edition version available this time, as well as new adventure modules. We have 3 from Bill Sylvie, aka the Dungeon Delver. There will be more guest authors and some for me. These modules easily fit into any campaign, or they enhance the Empire of the Undying Sun campaign guide, as they are technically set in that world. Um, Also, for anyone who hasn't, why don't you go check out Doomsword's page? I've got down below in the YouTube description, I've got links to his page there and his YouTube page, and follow him on Twitter. And it looks like he is back. So
Yes,
there
sir.
he goes.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. So basically, this entire insanity started with developing a set of house rules that would apply to VTTs, and really allow people to use, or at least allow people to follow and to know consistently what my rules were while running AD&D in a VTT. Things like movement, things like segments, which are, to me, if you don't have segments, you don't have AD&D, and that's all there is to it. And I utilize them heavily. But what I ended up finding over time, and finally decided to do something about it about a year ago, was that the Monster Manual, the 1977 Monster Manual, even the Monster Manual 2, the Monster Manual especially, is all, and I knew this earlier, many years earlier, but is largely unusable, right? The creatures aren't fearsome enough. The language used is not consistent enough. Being able to tell what a creature is capable of is very difficult, and sometimes you have to look in multiple sources to see that. So say you've got a flying creature, right? Monster Manual, Monster Manual 2 did end up rectifying this, but it didn't do much because it didn't repeat the rules for maneuverability classes in aerial combat. But Monster Manual 1 didn't give a maneuverability class, right, for a monster. Another thing that was egregious was Dungeon Master Guide gave you guidelines for assigning experience points to creatures. Dungeon Master's Guide gave you the attack matrix for creatures. Dungeon Master's Guide gave you the concept that some creatures are capable of hitting creatures that can only be hit by magical weapons. But you had to really kind of piece it together from multiple sources, and I didn't like that, and I felt like because I knew that there were things that I wanted to release, but I just kind of felt like following in Gary's footsteps
Mhm.
and starting with the monster manual first. Okay. So I toyed around with the spell book, brought that all into a database. I did all this stuff sort of programmatically. I appreciate writing all my stuff database first, even though that's a bit difficult to wrap your head around rather than in like a word processing software, because I know that I can use that database elsewhere and it's going to do everything that I want it to do. So it's kind of write once, run anywhere if you're building your text inside of a database. So I did that with some spells and stuff, and I was like, well, this is pretty useful. And I did that with some combat mechanics and some character related stuff, and I felt like that was pretty useful. But I really felt like the most useful thing would be to present these monsters in the way that I believe they were originally intended to be presented, because they should be deadly, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
all there is to it. And 2E took the tack, I think, that they should be deadly, but I think they went about it the wrong way. In increasing the hit dice and the damage of dragons and all that stuff would be an example that I would give. And it was all really compounded by the concept of the 1 minute round, which I know is an abstraction, but segments were introduced to sort of be able to zoom into those combats and eliminate a little bit of that extraction. And I always felt that they were underutilized. And it felt like a monster book was the best way to do that. So I went through and I standardized, and this probably, as an estimate, I would say it probably took somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 hours to go
Yikes.
through and rewrite all of the monsters that I cared about at the time, and to standardize them. And I think that I ended up standardizing them in a modernized way, unintentionally, making the same types of decisions that designers who had come before me in editions that I hadn't looked at, like 5e, making the same type of decisions as they did. So I got all these monsters built, right? And I was thoroughly burnt out because it was probably about June to maybe November of last year that I put all this together, and it was about the only thing that I did. And then I dreaded the inevitable, which was, how do I codify these terms and definitions that I've created that I feel are in the spirit of the rules? What is that document going to look like? I don't feel like writing that. There's too much there. I'm going to leave this alone for a little while. And then I moved on to some other things, and it was eventually that he's in here, right? Michael Dale. Michael Dale asked me, hey, can you show us what raw combat looks like? And then I jumped right back into it, and I started writing up documentation for the various rules of AD&D in a way that would be easy for people to understand, and started building a framework for that. And then it occurred to me that, wait a second, I can create a framework for monsters that lay out all of these mechanics that are useful for monsters in a single place, and not just monsters, but creatures, because I don't think that monster is the appropriate term for creatures that you can encounter that may not pose a threat, right? And I think that's one of the areas where monster manuals and those types of things tend to fail. So I approach them as creatures of different types, and then codifying all that stuff was what this project was about. And I realized it actually served a couple of purposes. It put out a lot of mechanics and stuff that I wanted to get out there, but also put out a lot of flavor and a lot of ways to use these things, and created a standardized system that would allow me to take these 241 monsters in 300 pages of text. let me tell you, 300 pages of text, 241 monsters, and I really had no way to present it without building something like this. So you can kind of think of this as a what would you call it? You'd call it a sort of as a representation, for lack of a better word, of the introductory material in Monster Manual 1 and Monster Manual 2. Admittedly, Monster Manual 2 was better at the introductory material, but seeing as that's only about 4 pages, I really felt like building this out to complete standardization of monsters. And then I discovered a side effect is that I could take this entire framework, condense it, and use it to get assistance through AI or something like that of creating unlimited creatures. So it's really a vehicle for releasing my creatures because these are the terms and definitions of these creatures, but it's also something that I intend to release in parallel along with a character framework, along with a treasure framework, along with a combat, surprise, and initiative framework, most of which are written to allow anybody to take this stuff and sort of subsume it into their game to create the RPG that they want. Because they can take these types of concepts, adjust the terminology a little bit, and create a sci-fi RPG or a post-apocalyptic RPG based on the core concepts that made 1E special.
For me, that's pretty interesting because not that development of 1E stuff has largely been dead since 2E. Of course, when people start to move on, the older editions, they don't have as much development. But this seems like, to me, really sort of stripping it down. So it's much easier for people like to get into it and not, I guess the way I'd say it is not have to play Gary's game to an extent. Like it's much easier now to make your own stuff as opposed to just rely on what's in the original or older versions of the monster manuals.
Right, and that was one of the really big goals. And now I will go back and say that I didn't realize this as I was doing it, but this is all within 2025. This has really become sort of it became an epiphany, and I realized what I could do here. And there's a couple of friends who have helped me, have at least listened to my ramblings over many years about this kind of standardization effort, and that's what I'm really trying to achieve. RPGs are going to have mechanics, and regardless of whether that mechanic is named something like an aerial maneuverability class or something different, it can be used anywhere. So I really wanted something that was open and free for people to use and meld however they want. So I could envision, for example, a framework that's like a 1E advanced GW framework, right? Where you can create a 1E version of post-apocalyptic play. And I'm probably not going to be popular for saying this, but I feel like that, and I hope I don't make you unpopular for saying this, but I feel like the OSR being built on the most low-hanging fruit of the D&D tree is something that I had to rectify, regardless of whether anyone looks at it or not. I felt that advanced just gives you so much more. So 1E, even 2E, okay, for all of its perceived faults by me, it gives you so much more than what you were dealing with D&D that it's a shame that it hasn't been used to more effect or to more effective effect, right? And I feel like it's going to go away, and I don't like that. Sure, we've got print on demands and all this stuff of old 1E stuff, but it doesn't do anything really to clarify the mechanics, and you never know when that stuff's going to go away. And then it's been particularly abrasive to me to see BX style systems release advanced mechanics that don't actually include the things that make D&D AD&D. And I feel like that stuff's going to go away if I don't do something about it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because we're at like a very interesting point in tabletop role-playing game history, because we've lost Gary. Luke passed away. Jim Ward is gone. Most of those guys who created this stuff, they're not with us anymore. And as we get further and further from the time when they created it, things become a little more muddy about like, oh, did they mean it this way or did they mean it that way? When they played it, clearly something was working back in 1977. But what exactly was it? And unfortunately, those guys aren't here to really explain it to people who came later. So to me, something like this is very interesting. Little off topic, but if you go to like the history of medicine, you'll have like some sort of seminal medical text, and regardless of what civilization this text is from, like 100 years later, you always start to see people doing like analysis of the original text. Like, hey, when you read this passage, this is what that meant. And we're kind of in that phase now for older versions of D&D. And it seems to me that like now is still is one of the best times to start getting sorry. Kevin just pointed out, I did not mean Luke died. I meant Ernie. I'm sorry.
I knew that, but I wasn't going to say nothing.
As far as I know, Luke's still alive and kicking. Or is he? But yeah, like this is kind of the right time, because there's still enough people who were kind of sort of around like right after to like really narrow this down and make sense of things that a lot of it was just like what people did. It was like custom that wasn't really written down, or like, we're going to play it this way or that way. And like, it seems like, now's the time to really codify it before we get, too far into the future and it becomes almost impossible to piece together.
Absolutely. And that's really been a big part of this, because I feel like this is disappearing. This complexity is disappearing in favor of a different complexity, based on later stuff and more modernized systems. But I also feel like this complexity is being rejected in favor of simplicity, because simplicity rule zero and these types of things, which I don't mind. I play plenty of games like that, but where simplicity is being pushed, maybe I dare say because it's the easiest, least complex path forward, or maybe just because people prefer the simplicity as a foundation upon which they can build whatever they want. I don't really know the answer about that, but this is, to me, what AD&D did will be a part of my life forever. And if the only thing that I do is put out stuff that my kids can have and that will be a part of their life forever, then that's fine with me. This is the type of thing that's not, look, I don't care if I make a penny off of this. I came to the realization long ago, particularly when I was getting burnt out with the monster manual and stuff, that the audience for this type of thing is going to be very small. you're going to have basically two types of people, right? You're going
Mhm.
to have people who want to explore 1E, and then they're going to jump to a niche product that they might not have heard about in order to do it. Or you're going to have people who have played 1E in whatever house ruled way that they've played it, which is perfectly acceptable, and aren't ever going to look at something like this because they're, it's basic resistance to change and whatnot. And I'm that way to an extent, you know,
Mhm.
but I felt like if I could present the monsters with their capabilities, with the flexibility that allows DMs to use them effectively the way that they were intended in a clear manner, then we could at least take a look at whether or not 1E itself was a good system or even a great system, and whether it was the best, because maybe it was. And that goes for combat, characters, attributes, all of those things. And that's what I'm setting out to do.
Yeah, and even for me, like even if people decide that 1E isn't their jam, they prefer other systems anyways, that's fine. But to me, something like this makes it a lot easier to figure out what was going on because this was TSR and its ascendancy where tabletop role playing games just exploded out of the ether. And even if you don't want to play the classic systems, I think it behooves any game designer to go back and figure out, like, okay, well, what were they trying to do? And what were people really responding to? And even though it's 50 years ago, then you can come and say, like, okay, well, in 2025, would people respond to that same thing? Yes or no? And, if the answer is yes, like, okay, well, now you have a template for how it was done. And you can look at modern games. Are they doing it the same way? Is it would maybe it be more effective if I brought in some 1E mechanics into a more modern game? I mean, that's to me, it's you can't lose sight, even if you don't want to play the original stuff, you can't lose sight of what they were trying to do and how it worked, because that should, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and see how that can pair with I mostly play 5e, but there's a lot of issues with 5e. That if you just swap out the mechanics, it works great. So I think that's something that a product like this is absolutely essential to figure out, like, what they were trying to do and what can be done.
And I appreciate that, and I very much appreciate that that you've looked it over, read it, examined it, and that sort of thing, and that you felt that there was some merit there, or at least something that made you interested, because I think that that's what's sorely lacking in 1E.
Mhm.
Well, what we get out of 1E is some really interesting, brilliantly interesting content. Okay, but anybody can read, and comprehend and use content. But we also get some brilliant mechanics, and they were thrown by the wayside after Gary's ouster and the move to 2E, and the minor revisions and whatnot that represented, and then 3.5 brought it back around. But it's kind of like, I kind of look at 3.5, like the 70s, right? The 70s of super groups.
Mhm.
You have Emerson Lake Palmer, you have Super Tramp, you have this kind of stuff, and even the late 90s with the hair metal, and then you have a backlash. 1990 starts and everything's simplified. It's like, no, we don't want any more of these arpeggios. We don't want any more sweet picking. We don't want any more guitar leads. Nirvana's where it's at. And I think that that's the point we're at as a society. I think the fatigue of 3.5 signaled, and especially 4E which I felt was executed poorly for what, I mean, it's
Yeah.
obvious that it was, to retain customers, but I feel like we ended up at a generational shift where 3.5 was more like, and Pathfinder was more like the late 80s. And then simplification came afterward as a natural result because nobody wanted to keep track of that. Nobody wanted to deal with any of that. They were complexityed out and all that sort of thing. So cyclically, it seems to me that I mean, I have to get this stuff out regardless. I have to do that if it's useful to people who feel like this sort of approach related to modernity is compromising their tradition of what they grew up with. Then that's who I'm here for. And interestingly, on things like these actions and stuff like that, I realized independently that I mean, this is just the way it flowed out, and I found myself making a lot of the same types of decisions as far as names of abilities and really kind of structuring this stuff within a framework. The same types of decisions that I dare say the designers of 5e made, which was interesting to me and was a surprise.
Yeah, well, I not that I want to defend 5e too much, but I think the original 2014 version was really an attempt to go back and find a lot of like what really worked well in older editions, but not make it nearly as crunchy as 3.5. Something that would be easier for new people to get into. And I think, well, if I had a problem with some of the older versions, 2e was the first. Like I've told the story a million times, but I had the player's handbook, the DM guide, and that god awful monster manual that was in the 3-ring binder where all the pages fell out.
Oh yeah, yeah, monstrous compendium.
But I couldn't find anyone to play with.
Right.
Because it's kind of like your situation now is exactly like I was. Like, for some reason, Marvel superhero role-playing game was fine, but God forbid you want to play D&D, you'd be a total nerd and outcast.
Right.
But forget where I was going with that story. Oh yes, well, my one problem with it is like some of the stuff was like very arcane and very hard to understand, just the way that it's written. So even just like just re-editing the material into a more easy to follow format, I think is something that a lot of those older version, something that they really need to make them, I hate to use the phrase make them relevant again, but make people more interested in playing them, because you don't want to spend 10 hours just to figure out like how to do a combat. It should be relatively straightforward and other abilities. And yes, I know it was not that bad, and Thaco is not that bad of a system.
Right. Yeah, well, the 1E guys hate that stuff, and the 2E guys hate the matrices, and everybody, kind of hates everything through a progression. But I think that's the biggest value, because what you would find historically with 1E and 2E, I do not feel did anything to address this. What you would find is circumstances where if the DM was going to run the monster to its ultimate capability, he would have to study it, and he would have to come up with a framework for how to run that thing, and it wouldn't fit with any of the mechanics that he had been presented. Okay. In 3.5, they managed to make that fit with the mechanics they were presented, but I feel like they went too far, right? Not every creature needs to have all ability scores. Not every creature needs to have feats. Not every characters don't necessarily need to have feats. I feel like it was just bloat in the name of maybe a mix of in the name of selling product and trying to get away from the sort of bad taste that was left in everybody's mouth for what 2E did. I feel like 2E was, at least to me, when I bought those books, what was I, 14 maybe, when I bought the Player's Handbook. I bought that and I expected a clarification of everything that I had studied for the prior 5 years, just studying in my room, even when my friends weren't around and stuff. And I was sorely disappointed because I got none of that. I didn't get the grid. I didn't get the miniatures. I didn't get clarification on movement. I got none of it. And it took multiple years before I did. And that was 3.5, but of course, really starting with 3.0. But of course, they dropped the AD&D moniker in preference for the D&D moniker. But we still felt like it was kind of the spiritual successor. But, the splat books and all that stuff piled on and changed that. Now, with 5e, I've read a bunch of it. I just haven't played it. Right. And I have a whole collection of that stuff. I really feel like the earlier parts of it, the advent of it, and the initial perspective and design choices in the early times of the development were conducive to maintaining the spirit of advanced Dungeons and Dragons, albeit a little more with a little more simplification. But then it progressed like all D&D versions do.
Yeah, slowly spiral out of control.
Right.
Campaigns and Conquest asks, how old are you and when did you start playing?
I'm 51. And I started playing when I was 7.
Nice. All right. So, in addition to the core creature book, I also wanted to get to the raw combat simulator. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a Windows machine, so I couldn't actually view it. But this seemed really interesting to me. What was the purpose of the combat simulator?
So the purpose of this was to sort of try to determine whether or not these rules present in 1E actually made a difference. Okay, because we have to remember that the rules as presented in 1E, 1E is very interesting because it presents very specific things and only those things as optional rules. Like hit points, death. That's an optional rule. Like determining whether repeating 20 only happens on a natural 20 or any roll of 20. That's considered an optional rule. And there are very few instances of that in there. And Gygax's own statements back in the day, for whatever purpose they were made for, made it clear that he and TSR at least intended to declare this as an authoritative rule set. So the idea that they provided options for certain things made me feel like other things were not optional, even though they weren't tied together in meaningful ways that you could examine and trace from book to book and chapter to chapter. They were still authoritative. I decided to try to take them at their word, and really started digging a lot more into weapon versus AC in pursuit, weapon versus AC type, You know, the idea that somebody with a ranged weapon that's ready can attack 3 times per 3 times the normal rate of fire per segment in surprise. Surprise, how that works. The There's a few more things in there. There's 5 or 6 things, and I'm drawing a little bit of a blank right there. But what that was part of was sort of trying to prove um, to myself how these would change games. But really, this was Kevin's brainchild. As I was talking to him about this, and I'm sorry to call you out, Kev, you know, in case you didn't want nobody to know, but he's been super helpful in talking to me about this stuff. And I don't know of anyone else who would listen to me because I can be very pedantic or obsessed or whatever. But he gave me, yes, weapon speed. That's absolutely critical. That's absolutely critical. These are all options, and thank you, Kev. These are all options that are meant to provide dynamism to the system, and they've all been seemingly, or most of them, have been thrown away in favor of providing abilities or you know, whether they be feats, skills, or you know, advantage dice and this kind of stuff to scenarios rather than actually digging in. And these are all the things that nobody ever used. I always used them every time that I could, but nobody I played with used these, and nobody I talked to used these. And these are sort of the forgotten, you know, stepchild of AD&D. So Kevin helpfully pointed out to me, and I thought it was a brilliant idea that, hey, you know what? If you want to do this, build a piece of software so we can see the statistical differences. Okay. And I first built it as a console app, and then I decided to wrap it in a WinForms GUI, and it gives you the opportunity to simulate. If your PC can handle it, you can simulate 10, 100 million different combats while checking the various AD&D raw combat options that nobody uses, and deselecting and reselecting those in the radio boxes and or the check boxes rather, and determining how they affect the end result of the combat. Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have to say, I can't believe that I've never seen this tool before. This is amazing, and I really wish I had this when I was working on, getting started on my campaign guide, because one of the problems with the more modern versions, and I'm not sure about 1E, is that the system that they give you to create monsters in the DMG, like, it's never correct. Either
Right.
the monster is way underpowered or way overpowered. So like the only way to figure out, like, is this creature I'm making, does it actually work? The only way to do that is just to test it in like innumerable amounts of test groups, which sounds great, but it's really hard to get adults together to play D&D.
Yes.
So, having something, even if it's not, like, let's say it doesn't include the human factor where, your players are going to pull any number of shenanigans during a fight. But just something to figure out, like, on average, am I on the right track, or is this, do I need to pump it up or take it down? Like, I don't know why Wizards of the Coast doesn't have this as part of their strategy. Like, oh, you want to be a game designer? Here you go. Here's this tool to help you figure out if it works. I mean, this to me is an incredible tool for anybody who wants to make old school campaigns, campaign guides. And it's just something that, like, it really takes the barrier to entry down, because I would have to write a module, and then I'd have to go and I'd have to find 20 people to test it, 30 people, 50 people, then maybe give it to some other DMs. This would like cut. I mean, I'm not saying that you want to get rid of test groups, but this would at least, cut out like 1 or 2 rounds of it, and I would have a much more polished product when I start going into testing.
Right, and I agree, and it's very useful for that. Now, unfortunately, I don't include a drop down of creatures, but I have all of those in a database, so it would be trivial to add. I added this specifically to explain to people as part of that Let's Talk AD&D Combat Raw series that I put on YouTube that Michael Dale requested. I added this as a way to show people, hey, okay, these rules make a difference. Are you cool with that difference, or are you not? Because you can take it if you like it, or you can not take it if you don't like it. But you should at least know what it does from a statistical perspective. It changes even one option, even one tick on a dexterity or a strength or an armor class, or a weapon choice with weapon speed factor, particularly being that lower speed factor weapons in melee can attack multiple times against a single weapon if the initiative results are tied. Simultaneous initiative, all of these things that modern advanced versions or advanced supplements for, say, OSR BX inspired game systems still don't take into account. And that bothers me because the statistical probabilities change dramatically. And it's worth thinking about that. Sure, it might not be the easiest thing to implement at the table, but there are ways to do that. And my own creature framework presents some ways to simplify this system while attempting to maintain the spirit. So what I will do is I'm going to go back through this as soon as I get time and retroactively apply, at least in a subversion, retroactively apply the decisions that I've made in the core creature framework to bring them into this and bring some of those creatures into this. Because the fact of the matter is that your drop downs here might say fighter, cleric, whatever, but most monsters are going to sort of attack that way anyway. The difference with 1E related materials versus something like Osric, Osric chose, and it's a smart decision. Osric chose to have every creature attack as a fighter, unless they had some special class or ability which made them not attack as a fighter. But I feel that the monster matrix separates monsters, humanoids, fungi, demons, devils, dragons, dinosaurs, what have you, separates it from human capabilities. And I feel like that's important. Saying, hey, all these monsters attack as a fighter just simply isn't good enough for me. There should be a separate attack matrix for monsters that is necessarily maybe skewed toward the monster side a bit in terms of difficulty and dangerousness, while maintaining the paradigm of a scaled attack matrix.
So Campaigns and Conquests wants to know, what language did you program it in?
I almost always write everything in C# nowadays. I will use HTML and JavaScript where necessary, but for the most part, I can accomplish all of that in C#. This particular application, this is what happened with this application. I built it as a C# console app, and then I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. And then I got tired of dealing with typing stuff in a little console window. I get real tired of that real easily. So I felt like I needed to spread it out and give myself some combo boxes and drop downs. However, I had been working on a multi-platform app, that would run on the web, which I've been working on for a couple of years. That's not mine. It's for a customer. And I was like, I don't feel like translate. I've been too into this JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Razor, and all this other stuff. So let me just do this in WinForms because this is a drag and drop. I can, transform. I can make myself a class library where this all stuff is all usable later, and I can drag and drop controls and assign them values and have everything go exactly what I want. I remember now why I hate WinForms, because this actually ended up being harder than if I had just done it the right way. And I knew better because I've evangelized against Windows Forms for about 10 years now in consultancy. But at least it works. And I'll wrap it up in something else later that'll make it more useful and more flexible.
Oh, it makes sense. So I am curious. You've got the core creature guide. You've got the software. Are you planning on sort of working this out all the way to? I don't want to say replace the original materials, but as like sort of a more modern. Modern, yeah, that's the right word. More modern version that's sort of like easier for people these days to like dig into and really figure out what they need. Is it going to be? Are you going in for like a whole, almost like a whole system, or is it just like the few parts that you think need to be revised?
Yeah, right. And thanks for asking. I intentionally intend. Well, that's redundant. Intentionally, the idea was that I'd get out this monster guide, and then that would be it. People would know how to run these monsters, and then I'd get out some combat options that could be tacked onto other stuff. But it really, at this point, I feel like it's best just to. And this decision was made, I would say 5 or 6 months ago, which kind of contributed to me not working on it for a while I tried to figure out what my problem was. I figured that this would be a game system with a framework, right, that covers all the most necessary mechanics and materials that anybody could build on or build a fantasy RPG on. And that's the ultimate goal of this. So this particular book serves as a vehicle to launch my monsters, because without this, I could release the monsters and nobody would know what any of the definitions that I use in those monsters, even though they're similar to AD&D definitions, nobody would know what those meant, right? So, and I quickly realized that releasing, like a 340 page book or something was beyond, wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to do at the time. It would take me forever, because I would nitpick the whole thing all the way through. I felt like introducing these monsters in pieces related to the type of creature that they are. Say there's a book called Oozes and Molds, well, now I can limit that to about 15 creatures and 32 page source book or whatever, and I don't have to include all of the information that was included in Monster Manual. I don't have to include all this. I can simply attach this as a free PDF that explains all the terms and definitions related to that small book. And then the ultimate goal eventually would be to have all those books together. Kind of like the you remember the Time Life series of books way back in the day, the Wizards and Dragons and the Baba Yaga, Finnish mythology stuff. I could have a collection of all those monsters released in a way that I felt was really well vetted and as close to error free as I could get, and then end up finding a way to release a full compilation, right? Because one of the challenges here, of course, is artwork for monsters.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you want to, if you want to be able to at all limit the description of your monster, you must have some sort of art for that monster. And then that's something, yeah, and that's something we suffered through with the original monster manual. There would just not be pictures of something. There'd be a one-line description. Nobody knew what it was. And then you get into something like some of the later bestiaries for Pathfinder, and you've got a picture of the monster, you got all these stats, and then you got a 2-page description. And it's like, well, I don't necessarily need a 2-page description if I can just look at the picture. Yeah. So that's kind of a thin line to walk. Fortunately, there's token art that I can use for the majority of these monsters, as long as I don't kickstart the project, or as long as I don't kickstart the project with that artwork intact, or as long as I don't make above a certain threshold of money off of it. And that's, as an aside, that's something I really appreciate about certain creators, is that just by virtue of being a member of their Patreon, they'll give indie people like myself access to their artwork in whatever capacity they do it. And a lot of my videos they use freely available material from a great composer, and a lot of my monsters use tokens from somebody else who's just a fantastic artist, and opens that stuff up in a way that indies can use it to promote their products. I would spend as much time writing this, building AI art, and I really don't have much of an interest in using AI art to create these monsters or to depict these monsters. So things like that are super helpful, and that's one of the reasons that I've really decided that this can be used by anybody to create their own stuff, because it's a CC BY. Just give attribution. It really, honestly, just don't copy the whole thing and post it as, hey, check out this new version. It's called Advanced, and this is all the stuff. Just don't steal the idea from me, but use whatever you want. And that's how I want the monsters to be. That's how I want all of it to be. I want it to be something that ends up existing within the public domain, within reason, to preserve these rules and these concepts forever, even if they're slightly modified.
So maybe like a copyleft, or what's the other one I'm thinking of? Basically, it's like public, but if somebody wants to use it on a commercial purpose, then they have to pay.
Yeah, well, this is CC BY attribution, okay, which is the same thing that, which ironically, or maybe not ironically, but which is the same situation Wizards found themselves in with the OGL debacle. They had to release CC BY. And by releasing CC BY, that opened up things in a tremendous way. It opened up things in a way that you could, if you wanted to, you could take their SRD right now, bring it into InDesign, build your own beautiful version of it, and sell it. And there's not, as long as you, give them proper attribution, that's yours to sell. And I would like to take advantage of that without relying on more restrictive licenses. So one thing that you could do, for example, is you could build a monster book on top of this, and you could license it under CC BY share alike, right? Which would basically say, hey, you can use these things as long as you share them the way that I do. But with this particular framework, it gives you the option of using this stuff commercially without expense, as long as you just credit the source. But I'm typically not worried about that, because most of these sort of ideas I feel like are already in the public domain, being that you cannot copyright game rules, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, most of this terminology I've created myself, but I'm not like married to it. Anybody could do this, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. It's a whole tricky area. In my campaign guide, yeah, I was like halfway through it when the OGL debacle came out. I was like, mother effer. Now I have to go and
yeah,
change.
that.
I have to I have to stop call. I have to really make sure that whatever I call them the isn't the same as a name that TSR or Wizards made up, and I have to make sure it's different enough. It's a pain.
Yeah, yeah, and it sure is. And fortunately, way back in the early days of the OGL with so way back in the early days of the OGL with Tome of Monsters, it ended up being negotiated with some of the guys involved with the original OGL that some of these creatures that weren't OGL, or some of these creatures that weren't um, in 3.x, some AD&D first edition creatures could be brought into the OGL, and so a lot of the foundation that was laid by the various Tome of Monsters modules opened up a lot of that stuff, and the SRD has opened up more, and the level, what is it, level up 5e by in world, that's opened up a lot of stuff, and that's a very permissive license. So there's a lot of ways to license this stuff, but I feel like just a straight CC by attribution, if you're going to use specific terms or specific chunks of text without some sort of authoritarian oversight, is where the game ends up needing to be. If people really appreciate your content, my hope would be that people are going to go to you for your content rather than going to a competitor who's copied your content, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the hope. But again, it doesn't. This is my gift to the community, and if anybody wants to support it, the more the merrier,
right? The old Winamp strategy.
Yeah.
Well, that guy made billions, so you never know.
Right.
So do you have any plans to make your own bestiary of for
Yes.
your own creatures? Are you going to release those at some point?
Yeah. So one of the things that I ended up realizing. So first off, I have 241 creatures that are classically inspired, and everything about them fits this framework. Although this framework ended up advancing a little bit as I was writing it beyond what I had originally anticipated the creatures to advance. So they're going to require minor modifications. So I'm going to take all those creatures we know and love and release them in groups by creature type, trying to keep them in manageable pieces where somebody can spend a couple bucks if they want to grab the oozes and molds, if they want to grab the monsters humanoids, if they want to grab the giants, if they want to grab the demons and devils, they want to grab the dragons, whatever. But one surprising side effect of this entire process is I found that with this framework, I can condense down and minify the text in such a way that it can be passed as a prompt to AI, as long as AI is capable of taking any number of characters. So I would like to release that sort of thing as a supplement so that other people can just either run it through an API in their own sort of programmatic, through their own IDE in their own program, to generate just hundreds of monsters that are compatible with 1E, or that they can just play around and post their monsters and that sort of thing. But what I would like to do is release all of these monsters that have, in my estimation, never been really used, or maybe never is not the right word, but are seldomly used to their full capacity, and get those out there in a way that I think makes sense, that's not too egregious to people who play the same game that I do. But I'd also like to open it up to the community where they can create their own monsters, and there can be community publications of monsters, and there can be rehashes of monsters, that are there's a bunch of monsters available in the 5.1 and 5.2, I guess now, SRDs that never appeared in AD&D. Same up with the advanced 5e. All of that stuff has a wealth of information that's allowed to be used in and I'd like to see this, I'd like to see this go wherever it is. But the very next thing, in my estimation, is that there will be monster releases, and there's going to be another framework that right away that starts to deal with sort of the core framework aspects of a book like the Player's Handbook. What it
Nice.
means to be, what it means to have attributes, what it means to have attribute modifiers, what it means to have a character class, what it means to have a character race. Much in the same way that this is created, and then anybody can layer on a book that follows those framework outlines to create whatever race they want, or they could feed it through AI and just create a race on the fly, a race or a class or anything like that, or even ability scores.
Nice. And do you have any time frame in mind for when you want to start releasing this stuff?
Yeah, well, really what it's been about is I've kind of wanted to see if anybody's interested in anything like this, because you never really know, right? So you can throw stuff out on itch and you can get some views and all that, and it's certainly not about money, but you can get some views, and you can come back and look, and you can say, hey, I got 1 view, I got 2 views today, hey, I released something, I got 10 views today, and that's awesome. I just want to know. I don't need to know, but knowing how many people are interested in this sort of changes my perspective on the amount of time that I want to spend on it, and the priority that I want to place on it. Because I have as anybody does, as you do, I'm sure, I have a lot of time that I can spend on a lot of things, but that time shrinks if you dedicate it, and if you misplace that time expenditure. So this has kind of been about, or I hope it especially becomes about, judging people's interest in such a thing. I know it's niche. I know that half the audience for this kind of stuff is going to think it's maybe too complex. The other half is going to be like, hey man, I got my D&D books, I don't need this crap. What is this guy doing? What's effective offensive hit dice? What does he think he's doing? I never played with weapon versus armor type, and if I did, why did he even change the table? All that stuff's going to happen, but a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, even to those people who've been playing with their own rules for 50 years, their own homebrew content, why not give it a look? If you've been playing with people for that long, certainly you'd want a little something to surprise them. Keep it fresh.
Right, and that's one of the reasons that there's there's some tables in there, and I was really picky and choosy, or discerning on what tables I wanted to include, which ones were out of scope, which ones were in scope, and that sort of thing. But I tried to include things and descriptions and bulleted rule points that might inspire DMs who have used these monsters for decades to think about things a little bit differently. Because I had used these monsters for decades, and when I standardized them and thought about them at agonizing length, I learned for myself what I ended up thinking about them, and a lot of those ideas I didn't expect to have. It was a journey, And I was quite hey, we got a cat.
Oh,
There it goes. I learned a lot through this process that I didn't expect to learn, and it was very fulfilling. And I hope that other people would be able to do the same, regardless of their first impressions on something like this. And that's one of the reasons. The primary reason it's pay what you want is because I need it to be pay what you want in order, maybe to get a little support and feel good about it. But on Drive Through RPG, if you don't have a couple of pay what you want products on there, you won't get verified. And then if I release something, I have to go through the 4 or 5 day wait for somebody to read it and manually, and they don't really provide feedback. But I don't and the same thing with it. So basically the way it's looking for me right now is I created a coffee account. If anybody wants to support over there, and I'll mention that stuff in a future video or whatever. Itch is the same thing. It's pay what you want, but that's sort of the proving ground of my development work, and provides an easy way. It provides an easy way for people to follow and watch the devlogs and stuff to kind of think about, or kind of see at least, what I've written about, why I've made certain changes. And then Drive Through RPG just gets it to a bigger audience, and gets people to look at it more. Because ultimately all of these framework things, even if I release products on top of them that are paid products, these frameworks are the supplemental material, sort of the foundation upon which those paid products can be built, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think just for anyone who's listening, that is sort of the crux of a creator's dilemma. So, if this is at all interesting to you, even if you're not ready to, you don't have to plunk down any money. Just go ahead and, give Doom a follow on YouTube at Doomsword, or over on X. And oh, that's Cyrus. Oh, he's here. If a creator's doing something you're interested in, follow, like, download. If they got a PDF or something, just download it. Something so that they know they're not doing something in vain. Like I have seen a number of creators over the years in different industries who just gave up on products because they weren't getting any sort of feedback at all. And then later people are like, "Oh, that was awesome. Why didn't you continue?" I was like, "Well, nobody told me it was awesome, and I had other things that seemed more important." So, if you like it, everyone go give them a follow. If you like this channel and what you saw, follow me here at Yang and Zhao 4. Same on Twitter. I am on Rumble, Yang and Zhao. It would be amazing if I broke 20 followers over there. And
I have 9. Sorry to interrupt.
I don't know how you're supposed to get people to watch over there, but
me neither.
But so everyone check it out. Dooms, are you going anywhere else to talk about this, or anywhere else people should follow you? Are you doing any are you running any games at the Guac?
Well, I've got one set up there, but I need to. What I decided to do there was set up one, because the last couple of years I've set up multiple, and what has ended up happening is that my games have filled up for whatever reason. And we're talking 5, 6 of them, over that period in time, and then I feel kind of. I can feel kind of bad because other people, and I don't know why, but other people's games don't fill up. So I've tried to hold it back and sort of determine what I'm going to do there. I've got one game set up there, and it's entirely full, and it's overflowing and stuff like that. And I want some of these people to look at other people's games, but that depends on other people setting up games. I'll probably I'll probably run 3 of them. At least one will use. Typically, I use some house rules and stuff like that aren't really designed to be house rules. They're designed to be in books. But I think I'm going to focus on what I talked about in my video series with Raw, and just run AD&D Raw with the changes I've made with my monsters, right? At least in one of those, to determine how well all this stuff sort of play tests. But they'll be pretty simple games, probably 3 or 4 of them. I thought about running a Star Frontiers game, so that's a possibility, because it seems like some people are interested in that, and I've got one ready from a couple of years ago that didn't end up seeing people show up when the guac was small.
Very cool. Yeah, so I just posted a link to the Dungeon Delvers guac. So go check it out if you want to play a game with Doomsword. You're interested in AD&D 1E. See what he's got going on with his systems. Go check it out. You can see if it'll work for you. Well, Doom, thanks for coming by, and I'll see you Friday, I guess.
Yes, sir. I'm forever indebted. I think Friday. Yeah.
Right, Deb? Friday?
And I yeah. Well, today's, I think Friday. I think we're good on Friday. I very much appreciate it. Thanks for taking your time to showcase this and talk about it. And thanks for reaching out, man. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I want to see how this develops. This to me, this looks very interesting. To really sort of peel away those layers of 1E mysticism, and just have something that's really straightforward to use. So Gone Zero Lero's bar tab. Yes, I have not signed up for it yet, and I really got to get the Dungeon Delver to add me as a DM. But I will be running the Mill House, which is chapter 4 from my campaign guide, Empire of the Undying Sun.
Nice.
So hopefully that'll be fun. So thanks a lot for coming, guys. And I don't think I have anyone else on this week, but next week I will have another 1 or 2 persons yet to be named. So see y'all later.